Hello, everybody, and welcome to Versus, brought to you by the Art Fight Podcast. Every week on Versus, we match up one fighter and one artist from the past or the present in a winner-take-all 3-round battle. In the first round, we're going to introduce our fighter. In the second round, we introduce our artist. And in the third round, we reveal our scorecards and declare our winner. I am Joe Nolan. I'm here with my co-host, Brian Siskin. Let the battle begin. This week, we're pitting Brazilian mixed martial artist Edson Jr. Barboza against American realist painter George Bellows. Brian, I couldn't be more excited about getting started with this new segment of our Art Fight Podcast.
Yeah, man, this is cool. This is a different thing. And I don't think that... I don't think people understand. Everything is a fight. Everything is a battle. And ultimately, we just decided why not put artists against fighters, right? It's not about who can beat each other up. It's just about comparing attributes, I think, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Although I would also say that given the fact that this is the first time we've ever done this, we're trying to figure out exactly what this is ourselves. I think we've worked on this for a couple of weeks and threatened to do this a few times, at least to ourselves. But Here we are doing it for real. And I think we should go ahead and get started. We're planning for this to be a shorter program than the normal, hour-ish long podcast that we do on Thursdays. This is a down and dirty 3-round fight. This is not one of those championship rounds things. We save those for Thursdays. This is just, a down and dirty, 3-rounder. And why don't you get us started, Brian? Tell us all about our fighter for this week, Edson Jr. Barboza.
Right. So for the uninitiated, Edson Barboza is a 155er usually, meaning that he fights at 155 pounds in the lightweight class. But he has recently, in his last bout, just as a few days ago, fought at 145, made his debut at 145, and was actually really impressive. It was a little scary to see how drawn out he was from the weight cut and all that, but it was pretty impressive, and we'll get into some of that. But he's 34 years old, 5'11". He's got 20 wins. He's got 9 losses. Unfortunately, he's been fighting, like monsters of the division. So he's I think
again for the uninitiated, that 155-pound category is like the hardest category in the whole UFC. So he's fighting the best fighters on the planet, arguably.
Yeah, and so the thing is that he's one of those that he's dropped 5 out of his last 6 fights, but it doesn't matter. He's one of those where you watch, it's incredibly exciting. He's very dynamic. He's very, very creative and is known for his leg kicks, and he will chop people down to the point of giving up just from kicking them in the legs. And I don't think that people I can't imagine getting hit in the legs with a baseball bat, but that seems to be what it basically is. So I've always thought of him as a bit of a kind of an outlier in the sense that his style is so explosive, so fast. And he's just so much fun to watch. It doesn't really matter to me whether he's won his last few fights or whatever. It matters to him.
Right.
And this last fight, it really mattered to him. He lost by decision to Dan Ige in a very questionable sort of challengeable split decision.
Right.
But look, I mean, the guy, he's been doing it for a while, right? Like he's been in the UFC since 2010. So, for him to be fighting the best of the best for this long, I think that's what to remember about Edson. And when he's one of those fighters too, that if somebody's going to start watching fights for the first time, he's somebody that I would want them to watch as a first fight, because he's just got his dynamism and his excitement. It's an amazing thing to watch. He really stands out in that way. So that would be maybe the overview for Edson Barboza. Obviously, like the MMA heads know a lot more about this, but we're trying to keep it a little bit topical here, right? But I want to introduce people to Edson Barboza as much as I want Edson Barboza to win today.
Sure, yeah, and like you said, I mean, he's been fighting for a decade, and in particular over this last decade, we've seen the sport itself evolve at such a steep pitch that it's one of those things where you look at his record, or you look at his the recent losses that you mentioned and stuff like that, and it can look like, well, why would I be interested in this guy? Why don't I see one of these other people who's beating him or whatever? And there may be some logic to that, but the truth is again, we're talking about a guy who's in one of the most quickest evolving sports in the world, in one of the divisions that's the most difficult to be in, period. And he's been able to accomplish insane greatest in the world sort of achievements within that Shark Tank, you know what I mean? So I think he's amazing, and you're absolutely right that he's one of those people who if you've never seen the sport before and you saw Edson Barboza just kick the shit out of somebody, you would either be put off the sport or you might be completely seduced in that moment.
Yeah. And and one last thing about Barboza before we go further is just to say that he's also a member of American Top Team, which for those who don't know is a very prominent fight team based out of Florida. And he's in and around the best of the best, and has been for a long time. So this will factor in later when we talk about schools. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, there you go. That's cool. I hadn't even thought of that angle yet. Okay, well, moving on to our second round, let's talk about George Bellows. So George Bellows is an American painter who basically was doing his work around the beginning of the 20th century. So the early 1900s. And Bellows, when you think about that period of American painting, the early years of American painting, you have this very sort of triumphal, sort of inspired sort of idea of picturing the American landscape as a reflection of the virtue of the nation itself. So this beautiful place that we're building this country in is a reflection of God's favor upon this nation. This whole idea is the way the value system is being worked out in the visual art of the country. But by the time the Industrial Revolution begins to happen, there's details between those two things, but by the time we fast forward to the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, painters start looking around, and people like George Bellows start looking around, and they're seeing the struggles of laborers, the blight of urban poverty, and all this kind of stuff, and they begin to say that these subjects should also be the subjects of painting, not just mountains and portraits of rich people, but all people perhaps should be included in the language of painting, and every situation is a possible subject for painting. So he ends up being one of these painters who changes visual art because they start to take on these really gritty subjects, and Bellows in particular. Really, it's one of the reasons why he's a good artist for us to have on this very first episode of Versus. His most important mark that he really makes on painting is in his earliest years and in his paintings of boxers. Bellows was let me see, I don't actually have it here where he was originally born. What did I do with that tab? Here he is.
It's definitely 18 something.
Yeah. I'm just saying, but he was born in Ohio. I knew that. And he was actually an athlete as well. If we want to think about them actually getting in a fight, Bellows actually played baseball and basketball, I want to say. Is that right? For Ohio State University. Baseball and basketball. And he was good enough at baseball that he was encouraged to go on and be a pro. So he was a very good athlete as a young man. But he was also a very good artist and an illustrator, and he really wanted to go and study art. So he had opportunities to play professional baseball, or at least was encouraged to. He was encouraged to become a professional artist in the idea of being an illustrator or a commercial artist of some kind. But he wanted to be a fine artist. And so he went to New York. And while he was in New York, at one point he had a studio that was on the other side of the street of a private athletic club. And at this athletic club, they would have, essentially like smoker bouts where guys who belonged to that athletic club would, put on these boxing matches. matches and amateur fights, basically, that would be open to the public. And Bellows would, cross the street and go see these fights after a long day in the studio. And some of his best paintings were these paintings of these amateur fights that he saw. And he also went on to do paintings of professional fights like Dempsey versus Firpo, which is one of his best known paintings. It's a painting where it pictures Jack Dempsey actually getting knocked out of out from between the ropes, even though he goes on to win that fight later. It's one of the most famous boxing paintings of all time. Bellows had this really cool way of doing the painting from the point of view of the audience. So it when you look at these paintings, you feel like you're in the crowd looking up at the fighters in the ring. It's all very sort of dark, but the ring is brightly lit. And he does one painting called, it's probably my favorite painting of his, called Stag at Sharky's. And stag was the name for what they would call these fighters. They'd call these fighters stags because they were having a stag fight, right? So it'd just be these amateurs, sort of bouts that they would have, just, kind of Fight Clubbish kind of shit, just so dudes had something to do, just go have a beer and watch these guys pound on each other. And actually at one point there's a quote here I have from Bellows where he says, I don't know, and this might be pertinent to our battle this week, but Bellows himself admits, quote, I don't know anything about boxing. I'm just painting two men trying to kill each other. One of the things I really like about the Stag at Sharky's painting is that it's really it's really sort of disturbing. Like he uses the paint in this way to really make it this really fleshy, sort of felt like thing. Everybody's faces in the crowd and stuff are sort of distorted and weird, and the boxers themselves, their faces just look like they almost look just like expressions of some kind of bloody meat. You can't even tell what's going on between the one fighter's elbow and another guy's nose. You can't even really tell the difference. And I want to think that part of that might be that at the early 1900s, that's around the time that photography is just making its way into the art world and just making its way into challenging painting as the dominant, art form. And I want to think in some ways that Bellows might have been inspired by the blurred effect of photography when he created paintings like Stag at Sharky's. But anyway, that was really his high point. After that, Bellows goes on to have a rather, full career. But it's really that time in those early days, in that early gritty period of his work, that is mostly remembered as his most important stuff. So I think now is a time for us to go ahead and move right along into our third round, when we're actually going to do some judging. So this is where we're going to decide who's going to actually win this fight. So our judging criteria are going to be based on the UFC criteria. So UFC criteria for Edson Barboza this week will be effective striking and grappling, effective aggression, and fight area control. And those will be compared to George Bellows' categories, which are effective use of creative tools. And he's not kicking and punching, but he's still got his tools and he's still using them. His effective creative aggression, and however we might decide to interpret that this week. And then also his control of his era of art. So let's start with the first criteria here. Tell me, how do you score Barboza's effective striking and grappling against George Bellows' effective use of creative tools?
Well, so I think that it's
the scorecard right here. I'm going to write this down as we go.
I think it's all the same, right? I think that
it's a 10-round must.
But I'm measuring Barboza on the same criteria that you're measuring Bellows.
Oh, effective use of creative tools.
Yes.
Okay.
All of those things I think apply, and there's so that's going to be one little tweak, but ultimately, effective use of creative tools. How many there's a lot of fighters that have it perhaps like a signature move or something that they like to do. Ronda Rousey with an armbar, or any number of fighters have things that they kind of rely on, perhaps for good or for bad, right? But I mean, in terms of creative tools, I mean, the idea that Barboza fights in space and can be the sort of maestro of space with respect to leg kicks. And people, need to understand that, when you are really good at leg kicks and kicking people, you can stay further away from them and not get punched in the face as much. However, I'm not going to give too much to this, but people have kind of figured out with Barboza that if you just press him and you shrink that space, that things get a little bit more difficult for him. So I think of him as kind of like a person that maybe got found out a little bit, or maybe he outed himself because he was just destroying people with these leg kicks. And then so there's been a little bit less of that. But I think that any fighter that is known, you can ask anybody, Barboza, they're going to say leg kicks, right? So it's not all, I mean, he has great boxing. He's got a complete game. But I think that in terms of an effective use of creative tools, I can't think of many fighters that have a tactic or a tool like that, that requires so much creativity, that causes so much damage and is so feared. And anybody that's going to fight Barboza is going to really be thinking deeply for a couple of months ahead of time about how to not get kicked in the legs that many times. So I have to, I know I'm harping on leg kicks here, but I'm just going to say, man, effective use of creative tools. Barboza, maybe it's not tools. I mean, of course he has a complete game, but I think that when it comes to leg kicks, that's his jam. Do you want me to go through the other two as well?
No, let's go. Let me do mine, and then we'll do the next one. So,
right on.
so I'm going to keep mine short because I'm ultimately going to just agree with you. I really do think this is a great matchup this week. I really do think that you can go into some details about the way Bellows uses paint to create action and direction and impact and chaos. And capture the energy of actual physical fighting. I mean, I think it's really well done. At the same time, I'll also say that within painting, before Bellows and after Bellows, even though he can sort of be credited with applying it to that milieu, I don't see what he's doing with paint to be as particularly unique and interesting as the sort of elevated place that Edson Barboza takes his leg kicks to and his striking to in general. I really think that Edson Barboza is rather like, even though we've talked about his recent, mixed record and things like that, at the end of the day, really this guy is in the legend status. You know what I mean? For his striking ability, his use of his creative
irrespective
tools.
of record.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. And so for me, he edges out Bellows in this case too. So it's also going to be a 10-9 round for me. Barboza favored against Bellows. And now in the category of effective creative aggression.
All right.
Okay. So in the UFC, when we talk about this, we're asking, basically it's just it's a reason to sort of make the fighters actually fight and not be safe in their fighting in the sense of, you've got to be effective being aggressive, So when we judge that for Barboza versus Bellows, how does that come out for you?
Yeah, well, I feel like you biased that one a little bit nicely by the way that you set it up. I think everybody can start to feel that the 10-9 might go Bellows' way here. But here's what I'll say. In terms of creative aggression, effective creative aggression, I mean, it's about being effective. And I don't understand why people do not more religiously apply leg kicks as an ethos and as a way of doing things. I appreciate that I'm not a fighter. You open yourself up to a lot of things. You can get taken down. There's a lot of factors as to kicking leg kicks and whatever too much. But anyway, creative aggression though, I mean, anybody that wants to understand what Barboza can do to a human being just needs to go back and watch his fight with Terry Edom. And when was that? 2012, I believe. So that was a good while ago. But it's made every highlight reel since then. And it's one of those things where his kick was so fast and so not telegraphable. And Edom, albeit maybe not on the level, he froze. I mean, it was like he timbered like an oak tree. So I mean, and so it was one of the most devastating head kicks I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it's one of those things where I remember where I was when I saw it. I've seen hundreds of fights and fight cards and whatever, but you have to give some value, right, to the ones where you're like, I remember where I was when that happened. So in terms of being effective, I mean, pretty damn effective. But I think also when it comes to the aggression part of it, Barboza is not the guy that's going to try to walk people down all the time. He's not. He's not that. So it's a different, perhaps more counter-focused type of aggression. So maybe that seeds a little way for your guy Bellows here.
Well, what are you doing? What do you got? Yes or no? 10-9 for who?
I'm gonna go 10-9 Bellows.
So you're gonna say so you're saying Bellows gets it on this one?
On the effective creative aggression, which you haven't gone through yet. You haven't justified it yet. But I'm just telling
I haven't done mine yet. Okay.
Yeah, but I'm just telling you, like, this is, I can see where it's going. But I just feel like ultimately, since Barboza is not a walk you down kind of, even though he's a monster and very scary and can do some very athletic, amazing things, he's not like in his sort of whatever you want to call it, his psychology or his fight methodology or whatever you want to call it, his skills don't lend themselves to just pressing. So I feel like by that I would probably need to go ahead and concede it, but we'll see. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very close too. I think it's very close because I think that, Barboza, for all the obvious reasons, can be very effective with his aggression. I think Bellows, in his own way, when him and these other Ashcan painters, start to basically just take on this brand new subject matter in the midst of an art world establishment, it was very creative aggression and it was very effectively handled. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It was a very aggressive thing to do, and they did it. And also, just like Barboza, later on in his career, Bellows sort of gets walked backwards too. And he's sort of, even though he shows this early promise and sort of stakes this claim early on, he's not able to, continuously keep up with everything that's coming down the pike and to do this. That'll lead us into our third area of scoring. But for me, I think I'm going to say, man, it's really close. And I guess this is one of those times where you have to make a choice. So I am actually going to say that I'm going to give it to Barboza. I'm going to say 10 for Barboza, 9 for Bellows. What's your final score going to be?
I mean, I'm supposed to be arguing on behalf of Barboza right now, but still my instinct says to sort of, you know what? I'll take it. How about that? I'll just take it. Yes.
Okay, 10-9?
10-9.
Okay.
Going into the third.
To me, it makes sense because for me, ultimately, I just feel like, Bellows has this flash of genius sort of, but it's less sustained than what we've seen from Barboza over the course of his career. So that's where I go with that. So the last thing we're going to talk about is art era control. In a fight, we're normally talking about who controls the ring during a particular round, who's sort of setting the pace and things like that. And we're talking about that with Barboza, but we're talking about how he's been able to sort of establish that across a career. And we're also talking about that regarding George Bellows. Why don't you go ahead and do yours first, and then I'll do mine, and we'll tally up our score here.
All right. So for art era control, I mean, you have to look at the career, the span of Barboza. And I mean, the sport was wildly different 10 years ago. I mean, in many ways, he has evolved with the times. He's not, unfortunately, I don't think as frightening and as much of a standout perhaps as he was in the maybe 5 to 7 years ago time. But he's in his mid 30s, he's been doing this a long time, and he's still very relevant on big cards. People want to see him fight. I don't think he's still, I don't think he's considered a gatekeeper. I think he's been around, and he has improved, and, he's still, I mean, he's lobbying today to, about his fight this past weekend, the loss that this just questionable decision. He's still super competitive, and, he's not
Absolutely.
just he's not just going to get a paycheck and be like, I don't care what the decision is, whatever. So there's that. Now, also, I have to bring up again, his, being an American Top Team and the company that he keeps there, the effective art school, right, that he's in. I have to sit there in this comparison and say, okay, what is this versus like the Ashcan school, which you mentioned, right, but we didn't really actually elaborate on. But generally speaking, I'll let you elaborate more on that, but I want to use that as a point of comparison or contention here, because I think that ATT, American Top Team, is a very serious team. However,
and this is a mixed martial arts gym that's had dominant fighters in it since the beginning of the MMA era. Is that,
yeah,
I mean, more or less.
yeah, right, just dominant. And
That's for our art friends out there who don't know what we're
yeah,
talking
right,
about.
yeah, exactly. So, but on the flip side, in terms of the Ashcan school, that was a poking fun, right? It was not even taken like this. The collective, they didn't even necessarily take it very seriously. It was a tongue in cheek, kind of an assertion. So I have to, So I feel like that, in terms of like, I don't know if it's like pedigree or what it is, but I feel like the institution from which Barboza comes from and continues to fight from,
And helped establish
with this long run that he's had. He's in his mid-30s now, and he's still going. He's still very competitive, and right in there. I mean, he's lost a handful of fights recently, but he's one of those that it could turn for him. But either way, he's always going to be sort of revered and very capable, and I think he'll keep going for a while. So in terms of art era control and mixed martial arts era control, I think that he's been very lasting. At the same time, I don't think that he's ever really been a contender's contender, like somebody that we really instinctually think that he's going to get right over the hump any minute now. For whatever reason, it's just never quite been put together for him in exactly the right way. I mean, when you think about when he fought Anthony Pettis and, I mean, I don't know. So without going too long here, art era control, I feel like there's a few things to contend with there, but I think that the one advantage that he has over Bellows is that the school and the institution for which he comes from is a lot more codified, serious, and established.
I think that's an excellent point, and I also feel like for all the reasons you just mentioned, and for the fact that we can look back on Bellows and see the whole of his career, and on some levels, the career of Barboza is still being written. And I think there's reasons to believe it's worth paying attention to what's going to go on with the rest of the career. I feel like there's this. I won't call this a 10-8 round, Brian, but I'm definitely going to give this round also to Edson Barboza. So we both give this to
Why
Edson
not a 10-8?
Barboza.
Why not a 10-8?
To me, it's not that big of a blowout. I mean, Bellows is. I mean, there's other Bellows colleagues who didn't paint great boxing paintings. Maybe one of those bums. Maybe one of those bums. It's a 10-8 round. But to me, Bellows deserves his spot here, and he holds his own in terms of the era, and in terms of in a sense, to me, his stuff is the best stuff of a time. That if you want to talk about the history of American painting, you got to talk about George Bellows. You know what I mean? So he's still that guy. Even if he's not the guy who was like Picasso and just was able to morph and change and just sort of lead the way through era after era, or Miles Davis or whoever. And all those guys are going to be in upcoming fights on Versus, by the way. So at the end of the day, Brian, this comes down to 30-27 from you, 30-27 from me, and our winner this week, Edson Barboza, defeating George Bellows in a unanimous decision.
Yes.
So, and maybe here we go. I just came up with this criteria, but maybe if they win every round and they win a unanimous decision, so that they won all the rounds on your card and mine, we're going to call that a knockout.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So it's a knockout, ladies and gentlemen. Come back next week, and we're going to be doing this every Tuesday night at 3 o'clock Central, 4 o'clock Eastern, right?
Yeah.
4 o'clock Eastern, 3 o'clock Central. We're on Central Time here in the American South, but we're going to be doing these Versus podcasts. They're probably going to be shorter than this. This one took a little longer than normal, but they're going to be short, sweet. 3 rounds of creative art fighting, and then we'll see you this Thursday for another full episode of the Art Fight podcast.
Awesome. Hey, well, thanks, Joe, for running this ship and making it happen, and being available. I hope your vacation was, refreshing or whatever.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
As good as it could be, trying to recreate the Gulf of Mexico in my backyard.
You did a good job from what I saw, man.
It was pretty good. Good.
All right. Well, so that's a wrap then. 30-27. Boom.
30-27. Okay, everybody, we'll see you on Thursday for Art Fight Podcast live at 3 p.m. Central, 4 Eastern.
No.
Oh, no, that'll be at 5. I'm sorry, we do it at 5 on Thursday, 5 p.m. Central,
so we do
6 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, Tuesday 3 p.m., Thursday 5 p.m. And you can do the calculations for the time zones. That's y'all.
Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Art Fight Podcast, because we'll be smarter there than we are right now.
Yeah, and if you guys have somebody that you feel like you would like to nominate for one of these affairs, I'm going to throw some names around that we've been talking about. We've been talking about Donald Cerrone. We've been talking about Anderson Silva, Bruce Lee, and then we've also been
Edgar Allan Poe, Elvis Presley.
Yep. Dimebag Darrell, Frida Kahlo, Keith Haring, Marina Abramovic. I mean, this could go a lot of ways, so we want people to play along, and we hope
Andre
that you guys enjoy it.
Versus Truman Capote next week on Versus.
That's kind of legit, man. That's kind of legit.
Let's maybe do that. I'm putting them on the list.
We have no rules. We can do whatever we want. All right. Well, I appreciate it, everybody. Thanks, Joe, and we are out.